Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me today on another Kristen's Whimsical Journey. So today we are in Amelia Island, Florida, and we are going to go to one of Florida's first state parks. So stick around and join me as we walk around Fort Clinch. After driving down that beautiful canopy road, we end up at the Welcome Center in the museum. Now there is a fee of $6 per vehicle to enter the state park, and then there's an additional fee of $2.50 per person to visit the fort. Now, this is a great budget vacation idea to come to the state park, check out the different trails and stuff that they have here, and then visit the fort as well. We are able to walk around this beautiful fort today thanks to Company 1420, which was part of the Civilian Conservation Corps, also known as the CCC, which was part of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Now, we'll get back to them a little later as we walk around the fort, but I just wanted to show you guys this great statue and showcase how they're paying honor and thanks to these great men for the restoration that they did on this historical landmark. Before we headed into the fort, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the state park. So we are located about 45 minutes northeast of Jacksonville, so it's a quick little day trip if you're visiting that area to come over here and visit the state park. Now, there are two campgrounds here on the grounds. There's one on the riverside and one on the Atlantic side. Now, the park is open year-round. They're open from 8 a.m. to sunset. The fort, however, is only open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with last entry at 4:30. Now, I highly recommend that you join the Friends for Fort Clinch. They have a Facebook page, and you can get a lot of information about events that they have going on. I believe it is the first of each month. They have a special event where they have a lot of reenactors here. So I highly recommend you check out those QR codes so that you can see what events are going on here at the state park. I'm not going to showcase too much of the museum. I actually would love for you guys, when you come here to Fort Clinch State Park, to actually walk through the museum and enjoy it for yourself. They have a lot of really great artifacts here that you can view that are from the fort and the surrounding areas. They have so much information about the fort, about the purpose of the fort. There's some great information about that CCC company that you can learn more about. And I really encourage you to take the time and to actually enjoy the museum part. It's pretty small. It's not going to take you hours to go through it, maybe 30 minutes, but make sure you keep that in your time period when you're going to be here at the fort, is to make sure you stop in here. Now, they do have a short little video that you can watch. I believe it was around like 15 minutes or so. And it's from one of the local historians that actually is here on the grounds at the fort. A lot of times when you come here, he will be here. He also has some books for sale in the gift shop / welcome center that you can purchase as well if you would like to learn more information once you return home about Fort Clinch and the island itself. But yeah, you guys definitely check out the museum. It's the first thing you walk into when you head over to the fort. As we step out of the museum, we are greeted with a sign that reads, "Imagine you are stepping into the past. The year is 1864, and the Civil War is in progress. Ahead of you is a masonry fort under construction. Union soldiers are involved in the building of the fort. Ask them questions about their lives led stationed at Fort Clinch. Follow the path into 1864. So that sign out front told us to step back in time to 1864. But before we do that, I want us to go back a little further. So I want us to go back to 1847, and that is when the construction of Fort Clinch began. Now, Fort Clinch was part of this big idea that happened after the War of 1812, when our coastal defense system was not quite the best. So what we decided was to start a third system fortification. So you have a vision of 200 forts that are being built across the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean to stop any invasions from happening. Well, only 30 of those were actually built, and Fort Clinch was one of those. Now, if you go over to Pensacola, you'll see Fort Pickens. If you go down to the Dry Tortugas, you're going to see Fort Jefferson. If you go up to Georgia, you're going to see Fort Pulaski. So those are kind of some of them that are down here in the South. But what is interesting is that Fort Clinch here, it actually wasn't ever finished. So a lot of what you are seeing was not actually what was built by the civilians and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That was actually also help from Union soldiers once the Civil War did start. So when the Civil War started, of course, this area was controlled by the Confederate, but it didn't take too long for the Union soldiers to come to this area, and they took control by 1862, and they helped to build even more of these buildings that we'll see today. So following the end of the Civil War, we see where Fort Clinch goes from an active duty fort to now in the caretakership status with the U.S. Army. So they're just trying to maintain it in case it's needed again. Well, it is needed again in 1898, when the sinking of the USS Maine sparked the Spanish-American War. So again, we see Fort Clinch open up as barracks, an ammunition depot. Guns were mounted outside. Landfields were laid on the outside walls. But once the Spanish-American War ended, the fort just is completely abandoned at this point, and it sat for years. And not until 1926 did the Army sell the fort to a private entity, because it was just seen as having no strategic value at that point. So it sat there completely neglected. The old brick walls started to crumble. Sand was piling up outside. You got to think, this is right on the Cumberland Sound. So you have the Atlantic Ocean, you have the St. Mary's River, and any storm that would come through, even if it wasn't a hurricane, it's going to bring sand into this area. So we see where a change happens again within the country, and we have the Great Depression. And so that is when the CCC company comes in, and they help restore this into the state park that it is. You know, Florida started getting land in 1935 for several state parks around the state that you see kind of opening up at that same time period. And so that was all thanks to the CCC that helped to restore this. So the fort, even though it became a state park and was open up to the public after the restoration, we see one more time that the fort goes into active duty again. And that, of course, is going to be during World War II. So that is its final mission. It's used as a joint operation for surveillance and communication. And that kind of happened across all the coastlines, where you have different spots every so often that are going to be looking for those submarines. And just in case our enemies wanted to come ashore here in the United States. So that was Fort Clinch's last active duty, was during World War II. As we leave this kind of ground level of the fort and head up to one of these beautiful looking areas, I wanted to go back and talk again about that CCC company that helped to restore this beautiful historical landmark that we are able to view today. So, following the stock market crash of 1929, America fell into a Great Depression. And of course, a lot of us, we learned about that when we were in school. But during that time period, President Roosevelt developed the New Deal. And within that, there was a series of different programs and reforms that he created to help bring the country and its people out of this great financial depression. Well, during that time period, in 1935, Fort Clinch State Park became one of Florida's first state parks. And with that came the help of the CCC to help restore. Now, they started doing this in 1936, so a year later. And the whole point of the CCC was to provide jobs for unmarried men ages 17 to 28. Now, they worked manual labor jobs to help with conservation and development of natural resources for federal, state, and local governments. Now, the CCC company, 1420, that was stationed here at Fort Clinch, they helped to repair the fort itself. They constructed the museum. They laid the groundwork for the campgrounds and the roads throughout the park. But the most amazing thing that they did here was the intensive job of actually removing millions of pounds of sand throughout the grounds. They only had shovels and wheelbarrows. So it's hard to imagine when we're working on our garden and we're trying to remove some of that dirt and soil from the flower beds, but could you imagine millions of pounds of sand that you had to remove from this grounds? I mean, without these men and their hard work, we wouldn't have beautiful state parks like this today. As we walk around the park today, though, we can see the amazing job that the CCC company did for their restoration to the state park and the fort, but also the continued work that is continuing to go on here at the fort to maintain this structure. Today, as we were walking around, it was very quiet. There were very few people here with us today. It is really cold outside and it is a holiday, so most people are with their families. But the state workers were actually here today and they were building some different things to help support the structures. So they're constantly working to maintain these beautiful rooms like we're seeing right now. I mean, this brick, these windows, you're looking at stuff that is extremely old and very vulnerable to the salt air that is here. So when we look at the history of Fort Clinch, we can see that this fort has been through a lot. And I find it very interesting that the state park has chosen to depict Fort Clinch in that Civil War era. So it's a great way for the community to learn different aspects of the Civil War. And so when we're walking through, they automatically tell you, let's step back into 1864. But as we're walking throughout the whole fort, when you go into each of the rooms, the kitchens, the blacksmith area, all these different areas, it's all going to be furniture and depiction of what exactly the fort would have looked like during the Civil War. And I think that's really cool. Today, we only had a few reenactors here. I'm sure that had to do with the fact that it was a holiday and it was a weekday and not on a weekend. But on the first weekend of every month, they have a lot of reenactors here, and it's going to be a large scale. So you're going to have all different activities throughout the day that they're going to have different demonstrations and everything. You're going to have demonstrations on making bullets, on sewing, on blacksmith. And this goes on year round. So you have so many opportunities that you can come here to Fort Clinch on that first weekend and come and interact with these soldiers. It is a great way to learn about how Florida played a role within the Civil War. And, there's going to be both the Confederate and the Union here, since they were both here at this fort and occupied it at one point in time. So you'll get to hear some history from both sides of the war. Now, for us, it was a little too cold and windy today to head down to the beach. But when you come to visit Fort Clinch, I highly recommend that you walk down the trail and go to the beach. So this beach is actually very well known for finding shark's teeth. So make sure when you come and visit the fort that you bring a little Ziploc bag with you. Head down to the beach and try to find your very own shark's tooth. I have a really great friend of mine who she came down here and she found a pretty good sized shark's tooth. So make sure before you leave the fort for the day that you head down to the beach and hunt for your very own tooth. As we've walked around the fort today, we've discussed a lot of different things. So we've talked about the fort. We've talked about the different wars it was involved in. We've talked about the company that helped to restore the fort. But there's one aspect that we still haven't talked about with dealing with Fort Clinch, and that is, where exactly does its name come from? So Fort Clinch was actually named after General Duncan Lamont Clinch. He was a officer with the U.S. Army for more than 28 years. He was a congressman for the state of Georgia, and he was a leader of the Whig Party. Now, during his service, he was stationed in several different areas. He was in Louisiana, he was in North Carolina, he was in Georgia, but he spent a lot of time in the state of Florida. So he was actually in command of the 7th Military Department Division of the South, which was located in Fernandina, Florida, which is actually located here on Amelia Island. Now, he was very active in both the First and Second Seminole Wars here in the state of Florida. And actually, Fort Clinch here on Amelia Island is not the first fort named after General Clinch. So during the Seminole Wars, there was a series of chains of forts that were built, and one of those in Frostproof, Florida, which is actually very close to where I live, there was actually a fort there that was named after General Clinch. So the room that we are stepping into now is the guards room. And we were so lucky that when we came over to this area, we actually got to speak with one of the reenactors. And guys, definitely stop and talk to them. You know, we had a few questions about some of the rooms here at Fort Clinch, and he was able to answer those for us. And was also lucky enough because they had the fireplace running, and my fingers were getting a little numb from holding the camera. But it was a nice little stop to get some of those questions answered that we had and to warm up a little bit. I can't say this enough. Like, definitely ask them any questions that you might have, because that's what they're here for, is to spread their knowledge of the history of this fort and the Civil War with you guys, so that you are well knowledged about what went on here at Fort Clinch. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for walking around Fort Clinch with me today and allowing me to share some amazing Florida history with you guys. So don't forget, I've put that link down below. If you want to visit Fort Clinch, you can click on that and get all the information that you need for visiting. Now, I highly recommend that when you come here to the state of Florida, don't just come and visit our beautiful beaches and those theme parks. Make sure you stop by one of our 175 state parks that we have here. Whether you're walking a trail or viewing one of these amazing historical sites, you will definitely have plenty to see and enjoy here by visiting one of those state parks. So please, guys, don't forget, go out, explore, have fun, and keep learning. Love y'all. Bye.